Sup everyone, welcome back to another video, and as always I'm honored to be able to answer your questions here. But even though I do say answer, I say with kind of like an air quote. I don't really answer, I just kind of get certain topics from you guys and I open up for discussion, allow more people to see these kind of topics and discussions, questions sometimes, and for everybody to be able to just generate responses down in the comments below. Now if you have questions, feel free to either DM them to me like this person who asked this one did, or if you want to leave it in the comment section down below and I see it, that's also fine. But today I have people who've been asking me where does Shenhe sit in terms of value, right? Because when we talk about inherent value in characters, I think DPS characters usually are some of the lowest when it comes to value. Now some of you guys might heavily disagree with that, but hopefully throughout the video I can kind of convince you to see it from at least my point of view, which isn't necessarily right, but it is a point of view. Anyways, if you like these kind of videos, discussions, we literally talk about everything Genshin Impact. Anything you can think about, we pretty much can talk about. So subscribe if you want to see more. So let's get right into it. Here's the tricky thing about Shenhe and other characters like Shenhe. Well, you see, I don't think I really need to explain what she does. She's a cryo buffer. She buffs cryo DPSs, and by that metric, her value should be intrinsically tied to how relevant cryo units are, right? Let's say a new unit comes out, cryo DPS, and it's completely utterly busted. Shenhe's value will go up because of that, and vice versa. If cryo isn't necessarily important right now or at all, or there just aren't that many good characters to choose from cryo, then inherently Shenhe's value goes down. But here's an interesting thing. Let's look at it from the player's perspective first, and then we'll turn the tables and look at it from Hoyoverse's perspective. This gets interesting, okay? So from the player's perspective, obviously having a character such as Shenhe is a luxury, right? You don't really need this kind of damage buffing to achieve endgame status. Genshin is by no means, and we've said this many times, say it with me, not a hard game, right? So why is it that Shenhe has any value in the game at all? And that is mainly because of ceiling. And here's the thing, when you pull a character, let's just go with Ayaka. Ayaka has her intrinsic ceiling, meaning a ceiling that no matter what you do, you simply can't break past it. It is mathematically impossible, and it's programmed into the game that even with the most perfect artifact with C6 R5, she cannot break past a certain limit. Now, the interesting thing is we have characters like the Kazuha, and we have characters like maybe Ganyu C1, right? And my point is there are other characters who exist to lift the ceilings of other characters. Now, for the 99.99999% of you guys watching, you'll never even reach the ceiling of Ayaka because it's just highly improbable that you're gonna get C6R5 and have the best CV artifact. This is not realistic, right? So we use characters such as Ganyu, such as Kazuha, such as Shenhe, and I say Ganyu, I mean Ganyu C1 to reduce cryo resistance, you know, blah blah blah. There are many ways to artificially boost the ceiling of Ayaka. Now, when I say ceiling, I really mean your ceiling, the ceiling you're currently at. Anybody right now who adds a Shenhe to their Ayaka team is going to increase that ceiling. And in simple layman terms, that's what she is, right? When we say she's a buffer, that's what we mean. You increase the damage ceiling. It's like a cheat code, but it's a very expensive cheat code. And for most people, it may not be worthwhile. And here is the thing about Shenhe that right now, for us, it's very difficult to see her value, especially if you're like a free-to-play and low spender, is that there simply isn't enough cryo DPSs in the game to justify pulling and investing into Shenhe. Now, what I mean by that is Shenhe's value will go up in time with more cryo DPSs in the game. Why is that? Because it doesn't matter what cryo DPS you use. Right now, Shenhe is arguably the best cryo buffer in the game, right? So you can play it with Ayaka, you can play it with Ganyu, you can play it with, I don't know, you want to play with Eula, and this is the whole point behind people running like Chi-Chi DPS, cryo Zhongli DPS, turn anybody into a cryo with Chongyun and then turn them into DPS. That's how these things are achieved. That's how those showcases were based off of. And what they're basically demonstrating is as long as you have a cryo unit, you can use Shenhe to supercharge them, right? So in due time, she will get better and better and better. Say it with me, better and better and better. And likely by the time Shizaya comes around, she will have aged into a much better unit. And that's just how it's going to be. Now that is from the player's perspective, meaning that right now it may not be the best time to pull for Shenhe because we just don't have that many characters for her to buff. Now, from HoYoverse's perspective, you see, this is the interesting part. Shenhe also doesn't hold much value for them right this very moment. The reason for that is the same for the players. There just aren't enough cryo characters available for Shenhe to buff. However, you must know that from HoYoverse's perspective, they are going to create an environment where Shenhe is more desired over time. Now, what could be a better investment than a product that sits on your shelf and appreciates in value day after day, year after year? So a character like Shenhe is very interesting because it's almost like an inverse proportion to regular DPS units. With DPS units, the longer they sit around on the shelf, they depreciate because more DPSs comes out sometimes with better kits, better constellations, better synergies, and over time, these DPSs always have to compete with each other for slots on your team. Right? If you have Ayaka on your team, there's a good chance, you're not going to have Eula. If you have Hu Tao on your team, there's a good chance you're not going to have Raiden Shogun. It's just like DPSs are constantly fighting for spots in your teams. Whereas a character like Shenhe, she's the only one of her kind. Well, people would say, oh, but Kazuha is a buffer too. Okay, yeah, I give you that. But oftentimes you'll see Shenhe and Kazuha played on the same team for Ayaka, right? A lot of these things are compounding as well. So understand the value of Shenhe right now may not seem as important. And that's why when you're looking at videos that say, oh, Shenhe is amazing, she is amazing. She's amazing because she is the only one that can do what she does. But at the same time, right now, she doesn't have the value just yet. But I guarantee you, in due time, her value will continue to rise and rise and rise. But here's the thing, right? What's to stop HoYoverse from making another character like Shenhe? What's to say HoYoverse doesn't make another cryo buffer better than Shenhe in 3, 4, 5 years down the line and replace Shenhe? Well, here's the thing, right? Like I said earlier, from HoYoverse's perspective, they've already put in the investment and design into a character such as Shenhe, and currently, while she has made them money, if you guys look at her sales, it's nothing impressive, right? It doesn't blow you away comparative to other characters, but I guarantee you, with time, she'll only get better, and that's also what HoYoverse wants. Let's say by the time we get to Sesnaya, Shenhe would have been released for like 4 years or something like that. HoYoverse have already invested the time 4 years ago on Shenhe. That's why they're gonna reap the benefits years later. So a lot of the times when we players complain like, oh, why are they making characters that are so crappy in the very moment? Let's say use Dia as an example, or you can use Yaimiko if you think we're too copium for even thinking Dia will ever have a glow up. Let's just say Yaimiko for the sake of avoiding drama. Yaimiko didn't come really into fruition until we got into Sumeru, right? So when HoYoverse designed these characters, they wait until months later. They're okay on waiting until they get their monies back. Right, so for players, you likely would have skipped Yaimiko when she first came out due to the controversies, and then maybe in her rerun after Sumeru came out, you decided to pull for a copy, which is completely fine. The money doesn't go anywhere. Remember, we're still from HoYoverse's perspective. The money doesn't go anywhere, right? Regardless of you pay them now or you pay them 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, year, 4 years down the line, they still get to line their pockets. They've already put in the work for Shenhe. And that's why I call characters like Shenhe appreciating characters. And in fact, all buffing units function in a similar way, because there is a very unlikely scenario where HoYoverse makes another better version of Shenhe. So basically, if they were to do that, then they'd be cutting off their own profit, right? It's basically like you can only have one item on the shelf and they choose to have Shenhe here. But if they want another item on the shelf, they would have to remove Shenhe and put another one on. They don't work side by side. Buffers don't work in the same way as DPS units, right? I can have an Ayaka, I can have a Ganyu. I can choose to interchange them and swap them due to the differences in their kits, playstyles, synergies, whatever. However, a character as Shenhe, her sole existence is to buff cryo damage. If there is a character that comes out that buffs cryo damage better than she does, there is close to no reason that you would play Shenhe. In all scenarios, you would likely choose that other character. Now, don't go like, oh, but Walrus, I like her because of her personality. Sure, buddy, okay? Sure, whatever you say. But let's just talk about this from a logical perspective. Like, sure, DPS is like when it comes to Ayaka versus Ganyu, maybe Ayaka does more damage, but Ganyu has a different playstyle, a different way to deal damage, which is also very impressive. By no means are you going to say Ganyu's damage is irrelevant compared to Ayaka. Maybe she does less. Sure, I can give you that. Maybe she has less DPS. But at the end of the day, the process of dealing damage and the threshold that is acceptable for damage dealt in the game is fairly low, right? As long as you exceed that threshold, which most characters do, you're fine. But it's very tricky when it comes to a character like Shenhe, Bennett, Goro, Sarah, Faruzan. Any of these characters, imagine a scenario where a 5-star version of Bennett comes out. Apart from a scenario where you need to run Bennett on 2 teams, the 5-star version of the Bennett will always take priority. As much as I hate to say it, that's just the life it is for buffers. And Shenhe falls into that category, unfortunately. But use this information to your advantage. Know that if Hoyoverse wants to continue profiting from a character such as Shenhe, it's in their best interest to not release a character to replace her, to usurp her, right? To outperform her, in layman's terms. Ultimately meaning that if you're wanting to invest in Shenhe now, it's fine, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're a low spender or a free-to-play player. There are other points of interest in the game that can just yield you better value overall. But back to my old point, in due time, Shenhe will likely rise to be a character that holds much more value, especially with more cryo characters being available. By the time there's 6, 7, maybe 8 different cryo carries available, they would all likely want to pair with Shenhe. And that's the gist of this video. If you guys are still curious as to whether I think Shenhe has value, overall I think she does have value, but it's only for the whales right now where they can kind of draw out more for value, because for people like free-to-plays or low spenders and you're running free-to-play weapons on Ayaka, there are other avenues where you can gain more out of your primo gems. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, urge you all to stay safe, peace, and bye-bye.